There, welcome to day 4 of TechEd. I'm Robert Green here in the Channel 9 Live complex on the show floor, TechEd in beautiful New Orleans. And my guest this morning is Jimmy Nielsen. Hi, Jimmy.
Hi, Robert.
Jimmy is one of the world's foremost experts on domain-driven design, and that's what we're going to talk about for the next half hour or so. So, Jimmy, tell us a little bit about yourself, then we'll dive in.
I'm a consultant living in Sweden, south of Sweden, and work for a company called Factor 10, which is a specialist consulting company on software development. And I've been doing software for 25 years by now and still trying to become better.
It's a never-ending quest to become
Yeah,
better at it. So, let's start at the highest level. I know domain-driven design. There's becoming very, very, very important, very, very followed. I know your talk yesterday. You filled the room, which you were telling me you were a bit surprised at. A lot of people in there. That's great. What is it?
I was actually very surprised yesterday. I'm used to have quite few people in the room for the last 10 years, so totally crazy yesterday. So I think domain-driven design as an approach for dealing with complex software development. So if you have a reasonable, tough domain, then domain-driven design is a great tool for your tool belt.
So domain meaning?
A problem domain, the essential complexity of the problem you're dealing with. For example, if you work with insurance, you know that there is loads of complexity in that domain. Okay. And you will probably get just overloaded by all that complexity, and domain-driven design is a great way of helping you deal with that.
So the domain is essentially the problem you're solving in the context of the enterprise or industry that you're solving the problem in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Exactly.
So you start with initially you need to write software that does the following, and how does domain-driven design help you get better at that?
Yeah, it's multifaceted tool, I guess. But for example, it's very much about collaboration with those who knows more than you, because as a developer, you are expected to have loads of skills in the technical side, and of course, I'd like to learn as much as possible about the problem I'm about to solve as well, but I will never be as skilled as those who have been working there for 30 years, of course not. So it's very much about working together with those. So that old developer cliche of saying that developing is great as long as I don't have to talk to the customers, that's exactly. This is more like the opposite.
Okay, so the idea is that obviously these guys understand the business. At a deep level, since they do it on a daily basis. You kind of know what they're talking about, but kind of knowing what they're talking about isn't quite good enough. What that's going to wind up leading to, as we know all too well, is beautifully written, well-functioning application that doesn't solve their needs because you didn't understand what it was they were talking about in the first place.
Yeah, very much like that.
Not that that's ever happened to me, of course.
Yeah, very much like that.
Okay.
And, I think also what actually happens when we really get interested in the domain together with the domain experts is that it might happen that they have insights too. So
yes.
It's going both ways a little bit. We add our abstract thinking to their daily work, and that might open up new ways of solving things. Instead of the old way of doing it, they writing a spec for us and we take it and do our best. So.
Okay, so that sounds promising. So tell us a little bit more about what it is, what the process is, how do you get started doing it, what does it mean?
Yeah, actually in the past, when I got that question, what is domain-driven design, I each and every time I was a bit surprised. Because I guess I had spent a little bit too much time on it and got home blind. So when people asked me that, I said it's about love and harmony and balance, and that didn't help a lot, of course. Of course not. But recently, Eric Evans, who wrote the book Domain-Driven Design, wrote down a short summary of what it is, and I think that's a very good way of describing it. And first, he suggests it's about focusing on the core domain. So instead of trying to deal with all the problems at the enterprise this way, go for those that are most important to the company, the place they have their competitive edge, and start there.
So this part I've read that several times and I don't fully understand that, because if I'm, as a developer, asked to build a particular piece of software, does that basically mean manage feature creep? Does it basically mean define what the software is going to do and then stick to it? Is it essentially the equivalent when we tell people you're going to build a Windows Store app, the first thing you do is you fill out the following sentence: this app will be the best app at doing this. What is this? Is that what that means?
I think some parts of domain-driven design isn't maybe not the quickest way of doing everything. So, for example, knowledge crunching and talking a lot to the domain expert do take some time, of course.
Sure.
So that's more like put the effort where the money is. It's more like that. And,
okay.
And most companies would have the use for a word processor, but we don't start developing that. That's easy to buy. But
okay.
They have the place where they make the money, and they are willing to invest there. That said, I think it's important also that people that get into domain-driven design, they will use that style for all tasks they have. Mm-hmm. It's actually, yeah, I think it's very much about design, and I can't write software without doing design. So,
okay.
Of course, I do that all the time.
Okay.
As a contrast to what I just said.
All right. So, again, walk us through kind of the process.
Yeah. So what I typically do as the normal flow would be to, of course, start talking to the domain experts to get a feeling for the requirements and the needs. And I try to be a little bit, not too smooth with them, but challenge them. And so we have a good discussion and mm-hmm. really I take the freedom of asking stupid questions, and they are fine with that. So the next step typically would be to try to paint the overall picture for this little subsystem that I'm about to build, and what are the other parts it will communicate with, depend on, things like that. Little bit of strategic design around my bounded context, which is the typical term we are using here. And then the next step would be for me to formulate a user story, like the XB format, as I want to show that. And then I instantiate that user story with an example. And most often I try to do that together with the domain expert. And that's a great way of capturing what we talk about in domain-driven design as the ubiquitous language. Trying to capture and create a language that is shared between the developers and the domain experts and used everywhere, both in the code and...
Right, so my understanding of that is that the ubiquitous language means that you should use the terms they use, not the terms you're used to, speak their language, so that they should when you talk to them, they should understand what you're saying. You need to understand them, but in order to do that, you need to be using the same terminology, and which means the same thing when they talk about it.
Pretty
right?
much like that. Just a little bit to add to that, and that is that their language is most often not crisp enough. They are most often quite sloppy with the language, so it's not just taking it as it is, but try to develop it together with them a little bit. So,
and is this all done on paper, on whiteboard? Are you doing any mock-ups or prototypes at this point?
Good question. Yeah, I'm trying to find what tools work best together with those domain experts. So we talk a lot, of course, and speak this ubiquitous language together. And I'm very fond of writing UI prototypes,
Okay.
and that works with most people. They definitely understand that immediately. And some of them would understand more like UML as a sketch diagrams, and then
Okay.
I'm using that. And what I talked about as those scenarios or examples, that's written language, which also works very well.
Right.
People are so different. Some like the UI, some like the
Okay.
written. And,
So it could be storyboards, it could be an actual prototype written with Visual Studio, it could just be, it could be UML. That sounds kind of scary to me, but that's okay.
UML as a sketch.
As a sketch, yeah. Or it could just be writing it out in a story format.
Yeah.
Okay, whatever works to make sure that they understand that the way they describe the flow of what they need to do is correct, which is a problem we always face, and that you understand exactly what it is they do.
Yeah. And we get the feedback loops
Right.
going that way. So when we do one of those activities, we learn about the others as well, and changing perspective. And yeah.
And this is before you've built the database, this is before you've built the models, this is before you've...
Yeah, the database I tend to skip overall. I don't think about that at all right now, because it's more, to me nowadays, it's more of a mechanism, and I know I can deal with that.
Right.
I used to be the opposite and start in that part,
absolutely.
but I've changed my mind about that. But the model, I think the model is up in the air. I have a kind of like a mental model I'm working with all the time, and
Right.
Trying that model out in those ways with the language. This sounds very philosophy oriented now, I guess, but yeah, that's how
Well, it kind of is. It's an approach to building better software,
yeah.
basically, right? At the very highest level, it's about what approach you take to do a better job,
Yeah,
which
exactly.
we should all be in favor of.
Yeah, that's exactly how I see it. And since you mentioned the database model, in the past I was, as I said, very focused on getting that thing done early.
Right.
So I kind of did that first. And then at that point in the project, of course, that's when I know as little as possible. I will never again know that
absolutely.
little.
You build the database with the tables, and then you discover you got 3 things wrong, and it takes you an hour to take them out and start.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that becomes a distraction and something that slows you down. And most often, to be honest, in the past, I didn't change the database model that much.
Yeah.
The domain-driven design idea, I think at least, is totally different. It's the opposite. So today I don't know very much at all, but I try to use the little knowledge I have. And tomorrow, when I learn more, I change everything again and work that way.
Okay, so what's the next step after that?
So when I have the scenarios in UML and the prototype done, together with the domain expert or just with my colleague, for example, regarding the UML, then it's time to write some code to try out that we have a good understanding of this little part of the system. So typically I would transform those scenarios that I've captured into test cases with a BDD tool, like SpecFlow or NBehave, for example.
Okay.
And what I'm doing then is like wishful programming, because I don't have any other code than that test case. So I can play around and try out what I like at the moment. And when I'm happy with that, I actually have a little spec for how to move forward from that. So if I see that I need a customer class, for example, well, probably I should write a unit test for that customer class for driving it forward. And when I'm moved on in that direction, I can get back and see that my acceptance test is green as well. And then it's time for the next story.
Okay.
So this gives a very nice flow, and it takes out that trouble of knowing what unit tests to write, for example. It's obvious. It's all written down for me.
Okay. So it's an iterative process then.
Very much. Yeah.
Okay.
And I have to be very willing to change what I did yesterday. Otherwise, this won't work at all.
Right. Right. As you discover that parts of the story had been left out, or you didn't fully understand, or
Exactly.
you're using a sort of ubiquitous language where what you think this entity is not exactly what they thought it was, and how they relate.
Exactly like that.
Okay.
And yeah, nowadays I don't know how on earth I could work in a different way. It feels so natural to do it like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
What other pieces of the puzzle are there before I ask you the next question on this?
Sorry.
So what's next in the process?
Actually, that was the last step before
Okay.
grabbing the next part of the problem, so to say.
Okay.
So the strategic design part I mentioned, that's about the whole picture. But then I be very narrow with the one story and work that all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
And then back. So shifting perspective all the time.
So if you read about this, it always starts off with saying, this is used in enterprise applications, complex applications, but everything we've talked about right now sounds like good practices regardless of what I'm building. Everything from the most complex enterprise application down to things that are actually fairly straightforward. And so is domain-driven design literally something that just enterprise folks should use, or is it something that everybody should use?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I understand why people say it's only about big complex things for different reasons. For example, there is a learning curve, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're very skilled at writing certain applications, data-driven applications, for example, in a quick way, maybe you won't become faster at doing that with domain-driven design. So on the other hand, if you are used to this style of working, I think it's nice for you in several different contexts. And just because you like this style of collaborating, for example, you don't have to implement with each and every tiny tactical pattern of domain-driven design. You can use another implementation technique, of course.
Okay, so how hard is it to learn how to do this? How hard is it to learn what it is? How hard is it to learn how to get started using it? How hard is it to learn to be good enough where it's actually helping? And then how long would it take to become really good at it?
Yeah,
It's a four-part question.
Lots of good questions. I might be the wrong guy to answer those because I've spent too much time on this and not learning this in the fastest way, I'm sure, because I've been trying out a lot. But I would say it's quite fast to get started,
Okay.
I would guess. And it's like small things you are doing every day. Just be a little bit more thoughtful about them and do it more proactively, talking to the domain expert, for example. He or she will notice the difference immediately when you really are interested in the domain and not just accept things, but challenge. That doesn't take a lot to learn, I think.
Yep.
Should be doable tomorrow.
Uh-huh.
And you will gain immediately, I think, from that. But then it's a heavy topic and lots of things to learn, definitely. So,
right. Entire books have been written on it.
Yeah, sure, yeah. But I would definitely suggest you get a copy of Eric Evans' book and read that. It's an amazingly good book, I would say.
And so how much of it is about the actual process of designing the app with the users, and how much of it is about how you write the code?
I think it's both ways. So what we learn together with the domain experts, I think we should let that influence our code totally, so that we don't have those transformations everywhere that is just accidental complexity.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have learned about the context, it should be in the code as well, of course.
Right.
So if it's if it's not in the code, it's probably not an important piece of that problem, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So I was reading an introductory article that started out talking about what it was, but then relatively soon got into such things as repositories. Where do we get the data from? Well, a repository. And then order calls order detail, but order talks to customer. We don't want those to be tightly coupled, so now it introduced the concept of factories. Is that part of domain-driven design, or is that just good coding practices that you will use? So,
well, yeah,
those have.
I think those have got the most interest in the past for most people. So, domain-driven design was kind of like the same thing as the repository pattern at some point.
Yeah.
And I think that's a bit unfair. But that said, those patterns are not unimportant, of course. They are very handy and useful for implementing in a domain-driven style in an object-oriented language. So, yeah, they are important. Maybe they are a little bit more secondary than what we started talking about regarding collaboration, for example.
Well, the interesting thing about it was, in this article on domain-driven design, was actually one of the best explanations I'd ever seen of why you need repositories and factories.
Okay. Yeah.
So, even if I'm not going to dive in and adopt domain-driven design as a mantra, I learn a bunch of stuff that helps me in my day-to-day coding, and so I might decide, now I understand why I would want to use repositories and factories. I'm going to start doing that. So, if nothing more, learning how to do this is going to make you a better developer.
I think so.
And then, obviously, you can decide how much of it to adopt. Excuse me. How much of it to adopt? How rigorous you get at it. So, one question is, you might be thinking, okay, well, it's just another thing to learn, right? There's so many things to learn. I need to learn how to use SignalR. I need to learn Web API. I'm a XAML developer. I really need to learn how to use. I really need to get good at Blend once and for all. I spend way too much time writing XAML by hand. So, I really need to get better at test-driven development. Is this just another thing that I really need to get better at?
I guess it is. But to me, learning about domain-driven design, for example, it's a long-term skill. It's not something that will go away in a few years. So some things we have to learn are more like that. A new framework, for example, it's crucial to us, but it's not going to last forever. But test-driven development and domain-driven design, I guess it will be around for a long time. So to me, that investment feels very nice. I like that.
That is an excellent point. It is not, and we tend as developers to underplay or ignore this fact. We think that I don't know enough about this, I need to be an expert at it, right? Oh my God, it's going to take a long time to be an expert. So I don't have time to even get started. And so what we're saying here is, learn what it is, understand what it is, and then start adopting it. Start adopting it gradually.
Yeah.
And then when you decide, hey, that really worked, adopt more, get better at it. It is an evolutionary process. Take 5 years to become an expert in it. You'll start writing better software tomorrow.
I think so.
Or the day after tomorrow. Tomorrow you read up about it, the day after you start implementing it, you're already better.
Yeah.
Get a little bit better, constantly. I think that's a great approach, rather than just say, oh my God, I got to read I don't know how long this book is, a 400-page book, and it seems really complex. I don't have time for that.
Yeah, I totally agree. What I very often see also is that people would like the whole company, every developer to buy into it at the same time, and that's a really hard thing to accomplish. So I always recommend, as you said, go stepwise, but also grab your bounded context where you focus in this style, and don't force everybody else to do it at the same time.
Right.
They might come along later on, but learning together, 100 people, for example, that's never going to happen.
Okay,
so.
Great. So the best thing to do to get started learning this, watch your talk from TechEd. Read the book. Give us what that is again, Eric's book.
Eric Evans' book is called Domain-Driven Design, and there are mine book from a few years after that. It's a little bit dated regarding some of the examples, but yeah, applying domain-driven design with patterns. And recently the third book was released by Vaughan Vernon. I think it's called Implementing Domain-Driven Design.
Okay.
I would recommend all three of those, but
Okay.
Eric's is the first, I think.
Great. Thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks
All
for
right.
having me.
See you, everybody.